Hello, friends. Right? We're all friends here, aren't we? And whether you're a new friend, if you just, this is your first time, so glad to have you, or you're a longtime friend, of course, we're glad to all be together. And I want to welcome everybody at each location, too. So everybody here at Legacy, as well as Richardson, Sloan Creek, Woodbridge, and Espanol. And everybody online right now, too, wherever you are out there. Today, we are continuing this series called Future Quest, which is about it's an important series. We'll have fun with it. We've had fun with it too, but it's really about moving into our future and God's invitation to be intentional about that. And today we're talking about a big part of our future, and that is friends. You know, we just heard the song, the theme song from Friends, I'll Be There For You. And when you think about that show, it's quite a phenomenon, really, right? It dominated in the 90s when it was on. And then it's never gone out of syndication. And even to this day, it's one of the most downloaded shows, one of the most popular downloaded shows, like right now. All these years later, it spans generations. And probably everybody in this room, even if you're at home overseas somewhere watching, my guess is all of us have seen at least part of an episode of Friends. And you think, well, why? Like, what is it about that show that makes it what it is? And I think a big part of that, or maybe the biggest thing, is I really think it taps into something at the heart of who we are, of how God created us. That He created us for those kind of connections. He created us to not be isolated, right? But to have a circle of friends who are there for us even when the rain starts to fall. When things are good, friends make the good better. When things are bad, they make them endurable, right? They help us get through what we're getting through, and we can't do it without them. And I think we all know that. But today, we're going to take a deeper look at it, because here's our principle today. Your friends have way more to do with creating your future than you think. You and I cannot get from where we are here to the there God wants for us and that we want too, His preferred future. You and I cannot get there on our own. We can't get from here to there living isolated lives. We have to have a team around us who are the kind of people who are on the journey with us, who can help us get from here to there. Like the teams that are playing today in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, those two teams are in the Super Bowl, and I think this year, legitimately so, they're the best two teams in terms of, how you finish out the season, how well a team is playing. It feels like, hey, you know what? The right two teams are in the Super Bowl. And why are they who they are? Well, it's not because simply they're a collection of great individual players, because the way the league works now, there's a lot of parity, so every team has a roster of very talented players. They all have that. But what makes these two teams stand out is they've figured out how to be a team. Not just a collection of individuals, but they're the best teams, and they make everybody better. And when you do that, it's 1 + 1 + 1 = 10. It makes us exponentially better. And you might think, well, in our culture, it'd be easy for us as individuals to build a team around us, to find that kind of crew, to have that depth of friendship, and to have the kind of friends that help us get from here to there, and the depth of friendship that helps us get to there, because of technology and all that. We're so connected. We can text each other, talk to each other, message each other, social media each other. We know so much about each other. You would think we'd be the most connected, generation of humans ever. But when sociologists, do their digging and all that, what they suggest is that perhaps we're the least connected people ever. Not that we don't have lots of shallow relationships and shallow connections, but a lot of sociologists would look at us and say, hey, perhaps more than any other time in history, we have less deep connections than ever. One study I read this week claimed that 90% of American men don't have one really great friend. Lots of shallow connections, lots of acquaintances, but not one really, really great friend in the way that we're going to talk about friendship today. And you and I are designed for it. We crave it. We have to have it. And so today we're going to talk about being intentional about our friendships and really what it means to build a team of, you could call them Future Quest friends, friends that help us get from here to there. In fact, if you came with somebody today, just look at them and say, will you be my Future Quest friend? Go ahead. And I know that's terrible. I hate when speakers do that. but it's fun to be the speaker making people do that. It's just mean, but it's fun, so I apologize. And if you're new, I'm really sorry. I won't promise I won't do it again, but I'm sorry. So what does it mean to cultivate Future Quest friends? What does it mean to be one of these people for other people around us too? And to answer that question, we're going to go to a book of wisdom in the Bible. Of course, all of it is wisdom, but there's a book called Proverbs that is really about wisdom for life. It's in the Old Testament. Solomon wrote Proverbs, this Old Testament king that God gave a lot of wisdom to. And Proverbs, by the way, is a really great book. If you're new to the Bible and maybe you're not a Jesus follower, or you're new to that, or you just haven't been around the Bible much, like, don't start in the book of Leviticus, because you'll quit and you'll think you'll move on from the Bible altogether, unless you're really into, obscure laws about don't eat lobster and stuff in the Old Testament. But in the book of Proverbs, it's wisdom for life. And it's very, very practical. It's just saying here's how life can work best in each area, in different areas of life. And Proverbs talks a lot about friendship, because friendship is so central to an effective life. And so we're going to pull some principles out and just say, okay, how do we find or really cultivate Future Quest friends? How do we be this kind of person for others as well? And the first thing we need to understand is that Future Quest friends bring out the best in each other. Now, we're going to see that in Proverbs, but we see it in life too. It's like if you have kids, you can see this. Like when your friends play or hang out with, maybe somebody or one group of friends, sometimes it doesn't exactly bring out the best in your kid. And you're like, oh man, my kid's so annoying right now. And then other times maybe they're with other people that do bring out the best in them, and they're so polite. And you're at the end of a meal or something, they say, thank you, Mom, that was really good. And you're like, who's that? You've been hanging out with somebody, we're going to keep hanging out with them, right? And we see that if you're a parent with kids, but that's, of course, true for all of us. And because of that, one of the big emphases in Proverbs is to be picky about friends, be choosy about friends, be friendly with everybody, have a broad network of relationships, because we want to impact lots of people, be friends with bad people. Jesus was a friend of sinners. We should have lots of broad relationships. So I'm talking about a crew around us, to make sure we have a crew around us who are helping us get to where God wants us to go and where we want to go. And so that's why Proverbs 12 says, the righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. That the righteous people, meaning people who really do want to be on a good path that leads to good things, make sure that they've got a crew around them. And I'm talking like that inner circle. We should have different layers of relationships. So this inner circle group of people around us, choose carefully. Why? Because friends are so influential in all our life. We will become like the people we hang out with the most. It's just the way we are as humans. And that's why 16 times in Proverbs, he tells us the kind of people not to choose. And here's that list. Hot-tempered people, foolish people, gossips, people who talk about others behind their back. By the way, have you heard about Chris? No, I'm kidding. Promiscuous people, gluttons. Gluttons are not just people who eat too much, but who do everything too much, spend too much, do whatever, just self-oriented people, gluttons, and lazy people. Now, you look at that list and you think, well, who's left? How am I going to pick anybody? And I get that, because I can relate to all these. But what Solomon is saying is, if you hang out with these people, that's what you're going to start doing. That's what you're going to be like. That's how we're wired. We're influenced by each other that way. It works positively too. Solomon says, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. If you want to be a wiser person, what Solomon is saying, it's pretty easy. You just need to hang around wise people, and over time, you're going to become wise. If you hang out with wise people, you will become wise. If you hang out with foolish people, it's just going to reinforce your foolishness. And so therefore, be picky and think about that. This is a series about the future, and you can actually predict your future in part just by looking at the people you're hanging out with right now. Because in a few years, that's probably what you're going to be like. That's just how we're wired. Now, many of you are teenagers, you're students, and you hear parents talk about and teachers talk about peer pressure and how important it is to make sure you've got Again, be friendly with anybody, have broad relationships, but make sure that you're being influenced and you're a good influence on others, and you have people who are a good influence in your life, and you're not hanging around with the wrong crowd and being influenced that way. And you hear a lot about that. And the reason you hear a lot about that is because it's true. You know, you can't really deny that, right? You just say, yeah, that's true, that works. The weird thing, though, is kind of the ironic thing is those adults, those of us who are telling you that, act like it's not true of us. Like, you know, somehow we've grown out of that or something. Or like Jedi mind tricks, you know, on Star Wars. It's like, those don't work on me. You know, whatever. It's like, peer pressure doesn't work on me. You know, yeah, it does. Like, it works on all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're 16 or 66. We are going to become like the people we hang out with the most. And that's why we just have to be selective. Not, again, about this, make sure we have a tight crew that we can influence each other in a good way. A couple weeks ago, a thing popped up on Facebook that reminded me of how this principle worked in my life one time, all the way back to high school. When I was growing up, I had a friend, I'll rename him Chris, since I mentioned Chris earlier in this talk already. I'll just use that. And Chris and I were inseparable friends for most of our lives, certainly all of our childhood. Before kindergarten to into ninth grade, we were always together. We played hockey together. We hunted together. We were always at each other's house. If we weren't, if we were awake, we were probably together. And we'd ride our riding lawnmowers over to each other's house sometimes. This was Alabama. Or, or bikes or whatever. But we were just, right, we were tight. And in middle school, or even before that, like 5th, 6th grade, when girls started coming into the picture, we would plan that together. Hey, why don't you go with so-and-so and I'll go with so-and-so? Why don't you break up with so-and-so and I'll do that? Which is messed up looking back, but it made sense at the time. And all I'm saying is we were tight, okay? And then going into, when I was in junior high, going into 9th grade, is when I began to get serious about following Jesus and became a Jesus follower and said, man, that's what I want my life to be about. And so I got involved in this church youth group. And so I was developing friends. I invited my friend to come along, and he did some, but he's like, yeah, I'm not into that. You know, you do that, but I'm out on that. I'm not ready for all that. So I became a Jesus follower, started becoming way more serious about my faith. So I had my church friends, and then I had Chris and my school friends, and they were geographically separate. And so they didn't really mix. So I kind of had two worlds for a little while. I had my church Jesus people world and my other friends at school world that were not Jesus oriented at that time. Chris and my friends were rushing down the party trail, drinking and drugs and all that kind of stuff. Party trail really hard and fast and quick. And so I kind of had these two worlds, right? So going into 9th grade, I was looking forward to it and all that, and go into, school starts. And Chris, my forever friend, like my best friend, starts acting like my worst enemy. And just a jerk. And for example, I remember going to sit down with my friends, like at lunch, at school lunch. And it's the people I'd always hung around and hang around. And Kurt's like, hey, we don't want you here. Go eat with some other people. You go find some Jesus friends. You're like, okay, jerk, but I went. He's a very influential guy, and he would, tell people not to invite me to parties or, and not, just push me out. Just say, hey, you know what, you do your Jesus thing, you do your church thing, and, you're too good for us kind of thing. And it hurt. And I didn't have another circle of friends at school, so that was a little problem for a little while too, and that's a whole other story. But so we, stopped hanging out. And then we lost touch altogether after our sophomore year because in our sophomore year of high school, my friend got expelled. He got expelled in kind of an interesting way. So we had this greenhouse at the school for biology and this course called plant ecology that he took. You can kind of see where this is going maybe. And you have to kind of give him style points for this. I know it's not wise. Teenagers, I'm not saying this is a good idea. But anyway, he got caught. He was growing marijuana in the school greenhouse. And that's a bad idea, but somehow there's something to admire. There's at least creativity in there somewhere too. But again, not suggesting it. So he got expelled, went to live with his dad a couple hours away. And so we fell out of touch altogether until college. I get this phone call that was very unexpected, and it was from my friend, Chris. And he's like, hey, Jeff, I know we haven't talked a long time, but I'm in trouble. So, man, I'm addicted. I've already flunked out of rehab twice. I'm in really bad shape, and I want to get my life together. And man, would you help me? And I ended up, going spending a weekend with him, and in that process, we had this conversation. And he said, "Hey, Jeff," he said, I want to explain something to you and apologize at the same time, and because I didn't handle it very well. I said, "Well, what?" And he said, "Well," do you remember when high school started, how I became a real jerk to you and really pushed you away from our friends and me and all that?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "Well, let me explain that." He said, "I know I should have done it differently, but here's the thing. I mean, I saw where you were going. Like you were going down a pathway with Jesus and what he wanted for you and taking that really seriously, and you had all your church thing going on, and I knew that would end really, that was going to be great. Like that was going to end really well for you. And I knew where I was headed and where our friends were headed, and I knew that's not going to end well, and obviously it hasn't, and I knew that. And I was afraid that we would influence you more than you would influence us. And so the only way I knew how to be a friend was just to be a jerk and push you away from us as hard as I could into that other deal. And it's just a profound little moment, because what my friend knew instinctively is what Solomon is saying biblically, that we need to be really careful, whether we're teenagers or adults, about the people we hang out with the most, because that's who we're going to end up being like. Again, let's relate broadly. Let's have all kinds of friends, but make sure that we cultivate a crew around us who are on path and who will help us on the path. And some of you may say, man, I've got the wrong friends. I need to cultivate that. Some of you say, I really don't have anybody. They're not necessarily wrong. I just don't have them. Like, okay, that's fine, but we need to cultivate them and get them. And here's the second thing, the second really reason this is so important to get from here to there to our future and the kind of people we need to be for each other is that Future Quest friends recharge each other when the journey gets tough. Because guess what? It's going to get tough. We live in a fallen, broken world, and life is hard. And we get depleted, and we get discouraged, and that's when we need friends the most. And not just any friends, but the kind of friends we're talking about, Future Quest friends that are there for us and with us and for us in life. Here's what Solomon says about it. Proverbs 17:7, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. It's easy to have friends when life's good. And we're easy to hang around and all that. But when our life falls apart, we don't have much to offer, and things aren't going well, we know that. Right? That's when you find out who your friends really are. And what he's saying is a true friend loves at all times, not just when times are easy and times are good. They love at all times. And a brother is born for adversity. Proverbs 18:24 says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. If you and I don't have the right kind of friends, when life brings trouble, we're going to be in trouble. Because you and I are kind of like electric cars with rechargeable batteries. We can only go so long, and life will wear us down, and we need charging stations. And if we don't have charging stations, and I mean the way God wired us, that's other people in our life, life-giving people. It's the way He wired us. If we don't have those charging stations, then we're going to not be able to continue to move forward very well. There's a great example of that in the New Testament with a guy that's kind of a big hero in the New Testament called Paul. If you've been around church a long time, you know about Paul. He wrote a lot of the New Testament. He's the one that really expanded Christianity and was starting churches all over the world and doing all. He's an incredible guy, and he's such an incredible guy, a strong leader. You might think, oh man, he's so independent. He doesn't really need other people. He's just so strong and all. But that couldn't be further from the truth. And one of the cool things about Paul is when you read his letters to the churches, how authentic he was. He didn't act like he had it together when he didn't have it together. And so you read the letters, and he talks about his depression, his anxiety, his at times loneliness, his paranoia at times. He just it's all out there when you read the letters. And that tells us a lot, by the way, about what it means to be a good leader. It's not somebody who just makes it look like we have it all together when we don't, but just to be real and say, hey, we're in this process. We're imperfect people in the process of growing. And Paul was great at that. And here's one of those times. He talks about it in this book called 2 Corinthians. In the New Testament, there's a book called 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. He wrote 2 Corinthians because 1 Corinthians wasn't very good. He wanted another shot at it. And that's just kidding. It's just his second letter. He says this about this really difficult time in his life. For when we came into Macedonia, we had no rest, but we were harassed at every turn. So just overly depleted because of persecution and all this stuff that was going on. Conflicts on the outside, fears within. I love that phrase. Some of you right now, your circumstances on the outside are terrible, whether it's conflict or whatever it is. Conflicts on the outside, bad circumstances on the outside, and fears within, because those go together, right? Life falling apart on the outside, fears within, no rest, anxiety, trouble, uncertainty. But God, remember that phrase, but God who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, a person on his team, friend. And not only by his coming, but also by the comfort you had given him. He told us about your longing for me, because Titus had come from Corinth, your deep sorrow, your ardent concern for me, so that my joy was greater than ever. He goes from sorrow to joy because of what God does. Now, we learned earlier in the book that he was so discouraged at this point in his life that it said that he despaired even of life. That's pretty low. Despaired even of life. I don't think he meant he was going to end his life, but he wouldn't have minded, is what he's saying. Is, you know what, I don't even want to live anymore. I can't do this anymore. He was completely depleted. Some of you are right there right now. You're just like, I can't, I don't even know how to go on right now. I'm just here. And that's exactly where he was. But then God intervenes, as God does. And that's the phrase, but God. And that's such a great phrase in the Bible. And I keep forgetting to do this series. I promised you a series just around those two words, but God, where things are this way, and then you have this phrase, but God, and then how God moves in and intervenes and changes everything. And it'd be a great series to do just on the but God phrases. And I've said before, hey, we could call it Big Butts of the Bible or something like that. It'd be great. Or I like big butts and I cannot lie or something like that. Which, by the way, if you're listening from overseas or something, that's a song. I'm not just saying that, like I didn't just make that up. It's a thing. So just so you know. If you're still listening, if you haven't cut off the podcast. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus. So God intervenes to bring comfort, to bring strength, but how? And he doesn't do it directly, he does it indirectly through people, because that's how he created us. And this word comfort even illustrates that more. So the word translated comfort from the original language of the New Testament, Greek, is just two words put together. Para, which is alongside, and kaleo, which means to come or to call. So it's to come alongside or to call alongside. It's sometimes translated encourage, strengthen, partner, comfort. It's a really kind of big word, but literally it's to come alongside. And here's the thing. You and I can't come alongside ourselves. We can't comfort ourselves. We can't recharge ourselves. We can't strengthen, encourage, however you want to translate it. You and I are like that electric car. We need a charging station that's not us, because this is something we cannot do on our own. We have to have somebody who comes alongside to provide encouragement and strength. And in this case, it was Titus who did that, this guy named Titus, who was one of Paul's friends, one of his team members. He wasn't there with them. And God, so he goes from despairing even of life to incredible joy. His circumstances don't change. The only thing that changes is a come alongside-er that God sends, a guy named Titus, who comes and breathes life and hope and perspective and strength into him. And if you and I don't have Titus kind of people, then we're going to have a hard time getting through what we have to go through. And think about it with Paul. He wasn't alone. He had other people in his life. He had other people with him. Remember, he says, when we came into Macedonia, and you think, well, what was it about the people that were with him at the time that weren't like Titus? Like, why weren't they life-giving people for him? And I don't know. Maybe they were so depleted themselves that they didn't have anything left to give. Or maybe they just weren't as life-giving kind of friends as people as Titus was for him. I mean, we all have different kinds of people in our life. I mean, think about people in your life right now. My guess is you have some friends, family members, people in your life that are you love them, but they're a drain on you. You know, like, yeah, no, it happens. In fact, you may want to look at me right now because I'm going to ask you to think about people who drain you. Don't look at each other or don't go like that or anything. But just, you know, for whatever reason, you know, when they call, you know, you're like, oh boy, you know, God help me. God give me strength, you know, or whatever. Or man, I don't know if I can do this right now. Or they want to hang out. And it's not that you shouldn't. I mean, you just have to put boundaries around draining people, right? Because they'll just drain your batteries dry. So it doesn't mean you don't care for them or don't relate, but, you know, you just have to. So we have those kind of people. And then we have a lot of people who are just sort of net neutral. And then there are some who are just life-giving people who just fill up our tanks. And that's a Titus kind of person. And we need all kinds of people in our life, but we got to make sure that we cultivate people that are life-giving people. And we choose to be life-giving people, you know, for others. I spent some time thinking about that this week. And just thinking back at times in my life where I faced trouble, either discouragement, disappointment, depression, anxiety, times when we had some kind of family emergency and like, you know, a couple times our boys who were very active had brain injuries and all that, and you're like, oh man, what's going to happen? It was real uncertain. But in each of those times in our life, looking back, I was so thankful to be able to point to, and I just listed out, you know, one or two or three Titus kind of people that God sent into that situation. And I remember in some cases, all I did was look across the hospital, look out the room into the hallway and saw them. And it's like, we can do this. I mean, that's all it was. Other times people spoke truth into my life or encouragement in my life, but sometimes just hanging out. One time when I was so depressed, I just spent a weekend at their house. Christy and I did. They didn't do anything except hang out. They would say, well, we didn't do anything. They were part of what God used to lift me out of a deep time of depression, just being with it. And that's the kind of people we're talking about. We have that opportunity to be that for each other, but we need to make sure that we have that ourselves and that we cultivate those kind of friends. And Future Quest friends also are so important to help us get from here to there because they'll tell you the truth. Future Quest friends tell each other the truth. And here I'm talking about loving confrontation. And it is really, really important because most people will just let us be the way we are. Future Quest friends won't do that. They love us too much to do that. And that's so important for a couple reasons. One is because after a while, we don't smell our own stink anymore. You know, like we don't even know our own issues anymore because it's just the way we are. It's normal. It's like, I'm good, you know. And when other people can look at us objectively, like we can look at them objectively and say, you know what, that's actually not so good. You know, so like smelling your own stink, like maybe you're working out at the gym and it goes a little bit long and you got there a little bit late and you're supposed to meet somebody for dinner and you're like, oh man, do I really have to take a shower and change clothes? You're like, I'm okay. And then you get there and they're like, hey, could you have taken a shower? Like, you know, that like you're really not okay. Like we just can't, it's hard to smell our own stink or see our own issues. We need other people to help us. Otherwise we're blind. Another reason it's important is because we're so good at rationalizing sin and stupidity and a bad pathway. Because of our sin nature that we talked about a couple weeks ago. We're just so good at convincing ourselves that a bad road is really good for us. And then even we know deep down it's not maybe the best thing, we're like, yeah, but you know, it feels like an exception, and we talk ourselves into it. We can talk ourselves into just crazy what we can talk ourselves into. It's like the flesh, the sin nature superpower is rationalization. And that's why we need other people in our life who can stay objective and get in our way and say, you know what, you're getting stupid. Like you're letting sin make you really stupid right now. Leaving your wife for this other person may feel like it's smart, and it's really not. You're going to really regret, like this is a bad idea. Or, you know, you name it, whatever it is. And if we don't have other people who will get in our way, then we're just going to go down lots of bad ways, right? And so Proverbs talks about that, about loving confrontation. Wounds from a friend, Solomon says, can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. When people multiply kisses, they tell you what you want to know, tell you how great you are and all that. That feels so good, like they're a real friend. Like they believe in me. That's not a real friend. That's easy. Anybody can do that. A friend is a person who will love you enough to wound you. They'll tell you the truth even when the truth hurts. And we have to have those people because of those reasons we just said. Otherwise, we're running blind. And if we're smart, when somebody lovingly confronts us, we'll consider it. And that's why Solomon says very bluntly, whoever hates correction is stupid. That when people love us enough to speak correction into our life in a loving way, I'm not talking about mean criticism. I'm not talking about people who are just mean people. I'm talking about people who love us, who are for us, who know us, and who want what's best for us. And they take the risk to say the hard thing. Solomon is saying, man, if you're smart, you'll become your own best friend and you'll consider it. There's a guy named Henry Cloud who's a psychologist and an author that I like a lot. And he talks about the difference between just mean-spirited criticism, that's not what he's talking about here, and loving confrontation. Here's the way he describes it, compares it. He says, so you can go downtown late at night, be approached by somebody with a knife who uses that knife to cut you open, leave you bloody, and they take all your money. And you call that a mugging. But you could also choose to go downtown to a place called a hospital where somebody may very well take out a knife, cut you open, and also take all your money, right? And we call that surgery. The question is, what's the difference? Well, think about it. A surgeon has your best, hopefully, has your best interests at heart, right? It's designed for healing, not for harm. A surgeon has you on life support. They're going to help you through this. They're not going anywhere. They're going to walk with you through this. And they'll be there for your recovery too. Because they just are for you and they want you to get better and continue to take better steps. They've scrubbed in and they've trained for this. Like they have skills, they have wisdom, right? They've thought about this. They haven't just gone in and said, yeah, I wonder how this works. They've thought about what they're doing. And people who lovingly confront us are people in the same way who have our best interests at heart, who scrub in. They know they're broken, messed up too. And they think about this. They pray about this. God, how can I love and at the same time speak the truth and just, God, help me do this. And they pray. They've done all that right. And when somebody goes through all that, what Solomon is saying is, it's a really good idea to listen. And if we don't have people in our life who are willing to do that, we're in trouble because we're just living blind. And we'll always go down bad pathways without it. This past week, I got to spend a little bit of time with a guy who's become a friend. And we actually went to the Mavericks game. I think it was, Tuesday or Wednesday night when we got killed by Phoenix. It was not a good game, but it was fun to be together. And he's our builder. Like he's the CEO of the company that's built buildings around here at Chase Oaks. And I remember a few years ago where we had a problem with our builder. And there was something that we felt like they were not handling right, and they weren't taking responsibility for it, and they needed to make it right. And so we worked with the people we were working with. That wouldn't go anywhere. So I called the CEO and said, hey, we need to talk. And so we did. And I said, hey, look, you tell me where I'm wrong, because it could just be we just don't perceive the situation right, and tell us that. But here's how I perceive this, and I think you've got a real problem, and you're not dealing with it, and you need to make it right. And you know how he responded? He said, Jeff, I thought you were a good friend, but now I know you are. Because you've loved me enough in a very gracious but firm way to let me know the truth. And because of that, it's going to help me be a better leader, because this is on me, ultimately. And it's going to help our company be better too. You're right. We're going to make it right. But thank you for sharing it the way you did. I know you're a good friend. Solomon is saying, now that's wisdom, right? And if you think about it, if we don't have people in our life like that, we're in trouble. And so that gets us to the big point of today. Your friends have way more to do with creating your future than you think. You and I will not get from the here, where we are, to the there, where we want to be. Or if you're a Jesus follower, bringing God into the mix where God wants us to be, his preferred future for us, we will not get there on our own. I mean, think about what Future Quest friends do. They bring out the best in each other. They recharge each other when the journey gets tough. They tell each other the truth. And by the way, this isn't just a one-way, sort of like we need to think about two ways. We need people in our life who will do this, but we also need to think, hey, God, are you calling me? You know, how can I bring out the best in my friends? Is there somebody I need to recharge and spend time with? Is there somebody I really need to get in their way or tell them the truth or give them perspective? We need to think both ways. But we've got to cultivate these kind of friends. So think about it a little bit. How? I mean, if you've got them, value them and make them more of a priority. At least if you're my personality, make them more of a priority. Some of you are just good at doing that. I'm not. I'll skate through friendships and get stuff done. But how do you find and cultivate these kind of relationships, especially if you don't have them? And this is a great tip. This is worth coming today. Like you've been wondering, is this worth coming today? It's worth it just for this. And here's the tip, okay? It's this thing that you can be part of. And God made it up. Like this is God's idea. It's this thing called church. You heard of that? It's Jesus made up church to be a place, not only to be his hands and feet on this planet, to pour out his love on this planet and to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. That's true. But also to be a family, to be a place where we can help each other grow. To be a place where we can cultivate these kind of friendships and relationships, because Christianity is a team sport. You and I can only get from here to there with a team. We can't do it by ourselves. So you think, okay, that's great, but how do I do that? Because sitting in rows isn't really going to cut it, right? I mean, when we're together like this is awesome, and God does things in the large group experience that we're in right now that only happen here. So this is really important. But this is not where friendships are going to grow, sitting next to each other. Right? We have to move from rows to circles somehow. Smaller circles of people that we develop relationships with. Now around here, that's two things, groups and teams. To choose to be in a group, we're a church built around small groups. And we're built around small groups rather than classes, not because we think classes are bad. It's just we think groups form these kind of relationships that we're talking about better, but it's a little more difficult at the front end to do it, to get in a group. But a group of people is simply a group of friends who want to help each other grow spiritually. That's really what a small group is. And some of you have gotten into Future Quest groups, and that's awesome. Let me encourage you to continue that. And if you're in a group, go and be authentic like Paul and, to be known. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. And if you're not in a group, get in one. So those are great. And team as well. Team means serving on a team, like in a ministry area. Right now at all of our lobbies is our partner weekend. We have teams of people who serve with our community partners, teams of Chase Oakers who serve together. That's a great way to get to know people serving together, as well as all our church ministries, Kids Zone and youth ministries and production of these services and small groups and lots of ministries out there where we get to serve alongside each other and grow relationships that way. And I know for me, those have been often it's been teams of people that we're serving with and going through challenges with where I've developed the closest relationships. In fact, here, I found this on Facebook the other day too. This is a group of friends when I was at Chase Oaks years ago as an intern doing youth ministry as a young adult. And this is part of our youth ministry team then. We did junior high together. And you may recognize some of the people. This is my wife, Christy. Up here, if you've been around Chase Oaks, that's Jack Warren, who's our executive pastor. Some of you may know that Gene Getz is the one who started our church, and this is his son, Kenton. This is a couple here that when I said I spent the weekend, when I was in depression and had moved back, spent a weekend with that couple, and it was so life-giving to me, and they didn't know they did anything. It's Doug and Sandy Bainbridge. That was that couple. The reason I show that, Jan Sampek should have been on there. I don't know why she wasn't. Maybe she was taking the picture. I don't know. But she's one of our pastors. But we were just a group of young adults serving together. We didn't know. We did it because we wanted to help, do something with teenagers and make a difference. We didn't realize the kind of friendships we developed that would last our lifetime. But that's what happens a lot when you serve on a team. So All that to say, your friends have way more to do with creating your future than you think. And so let's all take a step toward better friendships. Either being a better friend, and some of you think, there's somebody I need to talk to, there's somebody I need to hang with, or cultivating better friendships. You may need to join a group, join a team, or make that a bigger priority or be more authentic. I don't know what God's calling you to do, but this is such an important area of life that whatever step God's calling you to do, let's do it. And let's ask God to help us. So let's bow our heads together in prayer. Father, I thank you for just giving us help in how to be the kind of friends that you created us for. And Lord, I pray you would speak into our hearts, just whatever step you want us to take, and then give us the courage and the discipline to take that step of friendship. And I pray right now for those who are especially lonely, that you would fill them with your presence in a powerful way, and that you would send a Titus kind of person into their life. And that you would help them walk toward community from isolation and help them take scary steps to do that. And we thank you so much, God, that you love us and you want what's best for us. In Jesus' name, amen.